Translator, Dark Angel, Editor, Kurisu. Who else still refuses to accept it? Ling Han halted his steps and cast a smiling glance toward the others. All of them shook their heads. This fellow was simply too ferocious. Anyone not in Gushing Spring Tier was utterly unqualified to trade blows with Ling Han. Those few martial artists in Gushing Spring Tier let out cold snorts. They did not fear Ling Han, yet they dreaded facing Lu Yutong. At present, Lu Yutong held her sword and stood guard at Ling Han's side, so no one dared act recklessly. Most importantly, they had no time to pester Ling Han now. That stock of spiritual medicine had already slipped into the mysterious zone. What mattered most was how to lure it back out. More and more people poured over, surrounding this region from every direction. This was likely the central zone of the entire underground space. It was circular, and the area it covered was extremely broad. Most crucially, that dark region seemed to swallow all surrounding light, as though it were a solid object, capable of blocking their vision. Someone standing at one end could not see the other end at all. Fortunately, enough people had entered, and could more or less ensure this place was completely encircled. At the very least, if that stock of godly medicine emerged, they would know in an instant. What now? After forming a ring around the dark region, everyone asked awkwardly, "Keep it trapped! I refuse to believe it'll never come back out," someone said. Are you an idiot? That's a plant. It can bury its roots inside for years, even for hundreds of years. But what about us? At most, we'll have to leave in 3 days, another person snapped in rebuke. Oh, right, the earlier speaker said, a little embarrassed. Everyone knit their brows in thought. That was unquestionably a stock of spiritual medicine, and it might even have reached the legendary godly level, yet all they could do was stand here and stare. The feeling was enough to drive anyone mad. Some left to inform the old monsters waiting outside the opening, hoping they might have some idea of what to do, while the rest remained here to keep watch. Ling Han slowly approached that invisible barrier. He extended a hand to feel it, a sensation that was very familiar. A faint smile lifted the corners of Ling Han's lips. Years ago, he had ventured into many ancient historical sites and witnessed countless similar scenes. That was also why he had shouted out that warning earlier. This was not a wall, but an aura field at a level above Heaven Tier. If he were still in Heaven Tier, then based on his studies of this kind of aura field, he could force his way through and pass. But now, he was completely unqualified to attempt such a thing. Could it be? He would have to use that? Ling Han drew out the damaged saber. This was his disciple's treasured saber, and it was also possibly the only remnant of his disciple he might ever find. If he released all the remaining might of the spiritual tool in one explosive burst, he should be able to forcibly wield power on par with Heaven Tier. But the problem was, such an explosive burst would also mean the treasured saber's total end. Ling Han hesitated. And there was another issue. This treasured saber could only erupt with such power once. So after he entered, how was he to come back out? Yet, after a brief moment, he finally made his choice. He had to go in. Because it was not only the godly medicine within. The secret behind that great battle years ago should also be hidden there, and he wanted to uncover the reason for that battle. Moreover, if there truly was the corpse of an ultimate shattering void tier warrior inside that had formed this aura field, then perhaps, who knew, he might have a way to disperse it. You two, cover for me, Ling Han said to Lu Yutong and Li Xichan. This region was vast, so everyone stood about 10 meters apart to completely encircle it. Thus, Ling Han stood between the two girls. It would not be easy for those beyond the two girls to notice him there, unless they were paying close attention. The two girls did not know what he intended, but both nodded because they knew this man had the ability to accomplish the impossible. Ling Han began to revive the treasured saber. Zhang Yuefeng's martial intent had originated from him, and though he was extremely weak at present, their martial paths were of the same vein. Under the stimulation of his divine sense, the martial intent engraved within the treasured saber began to stir awake. Weng, the seals upon the treasured saber lit up one after another, shining brilliantly. However, this was the final radiance it would ever give. Soon, it would become utterly ordinary, no different from any common weapon. Ling Han did not hesitate in the slightest. He used the treasured saber to pierce into the aura field, carving open a path for himself. Even so, his emotions were taut as a drawn bow. The treasured saber in his hand quivered like a fish thrown onto dry land, and even his body shook along with it from the force of its trembling, so much so that he was forced to advance in a zigzag. His figure vanished instantly into that dark region, and could no longer be seen. Liu Yutong and Li Chan were both struck dumb with shock. They exchanged a glance, and in each other's eyes they saw profound astonishment, along with fierce admiration. Was there anything this youth, no, this man, could not do? They swiftly withdrew their gazes and became vigilant, focusing on covering for Ling Han so that no one would notice he had disappeared. Otherwise, even if Ling Han truly obtained a treasure, with his current ability he would not be able to keep it. Sweat drenched Ling Han's entire body. Danger lurked everywhere within this aura field. Years ago, when he was still in Heaven Tier, a single wrong step could leave him gravely injured. With his current cultivation at only the 6th layer of Element Gathering Tier, this was practically reaching into a roaring fire to snatch chestnuts. The slightest mistake could cost him his life, and there would definitely be no second chance. Yet that only made him more exhilarated. He was utterly focused, and his eyes shone with an intense brilliance. Often, there was not much difference between a genius and a maniac. In his previous life, he had devoted himself to alchemy. Once he began refining pills, it was as if he transformed into a madman. In this life, he had devoted himself to martial arts, and likewise there was a part of him that was a maniac, only he had never had an opportunity to reveal it before. This situation, with peril hemming him in on all sides, made his whole body shiver, yet also made him even more excited. To hover at the boundary of life and death allowed him to truly feel the weight of life, and his divine sense surged like vast ocean waters. He even had a sense that perhaps only a place this dangerous could temper one's divine sense. The light from the treasured saber began to flicker, and Ling Han was jolted. The damage to this treasured saber was far more severe than he had imagined. It had endured for only such a short time, and already seemed on the verge of going out. He enjoyed risks, but risking and walking straight into death were two different things. He hurriedly increased his speed. Because he had to calculate the shifting changes within the aura field, his mind was intensely concentrated, and his mental energy was being consumed at an alarming rate. The sweat soaking his body streamed down like water, and in just a few short moments, it had drenched all his clothes and even left wet traces beneath his steps. Yet it was as if he felt none of it. His eyes were bright, and he pressed onward. Wang, the treasured saber gave one final flicker, and then the light of every seal vanished at once. The seals shattering, this meant the martial intent within the treasured saber had been completely wiped away. Who? Ling Han leaped and burst out with a loud exhale. He had finally forced his way out of the region sealed by the aura field. Light appeared before him once more. This was an area only about 100 feet across. In the center sat a corpse, cross-legged upon the ground, and that stalk of godly medicine was currently working hard to root itself into the earth. However, the ground here seemed especially hard. After so long, the stalk of godly medicine had only managed to insert half its roots into the soil. Ling Han's eyes lit up, and he quietly drew nearer to the stalk of godly medicine. He did not know whether a godly medicine had a front or back, but it was clear the stalk had not yet noticed him. 10 steps, 8 steps, 5 steps, 3 steps. Ling Han suddenly sprang forward and thrust out a hand to seize that stalk of godly medicine. Translator, Dark Angel. Editor, Kurisu. That godly medicine had been exerting every shred of strength to burrow its roots deeper into the earth, never imagining that anyone could suddenly breach the region sealed off by the aura field. Thus, when Ling Han rushed in, it was caught wholly unprepared. In frantic haste, it yanked its roots out of the ground, preparing to bolt away once more. Yet this time, it was already a step too late. Its movements were indeed swift. Its roots had already been pulled free. Yet Ling Han's hand likewise shot out in the same instant, and his fingers clamped down upon those roots. Z! The godly medicine looked as if it had been frightened out of its wits. The blossom that had been in full bloom instantly withdrew every petal. and even its stalk twisted and bent as if trying to curl into itself. But in the very next moment, it suddenly began to struggle with savage ferocity, and it actually tore itself free from his grasp. Shoo! It scrambled back into the region sealed by the aura field, and in only a few breaths, it vanished completely into the darkness. Ling Han was stunned. When he opened his fist and looked, 3 torn-off roots remained clenched in his palm. From the ragged ends dripped a milky white liquid, and in that instant, an indescribably refreshing fragrance flooded the air, causing his whole body to slacken and loosen. It was as though he was becoming light as a feather, about to ascend straight to the heavens. This was the godly medicine. How could Ling Han dare squander even the slightest trace? He hurriedly stuck out his tongue and licked that milky white lid clean. To waste even a single drop would be an unforgivable sin. Invigorating. So damn invigorating. Merely catching a whiff of this godly medicine was enough to make him feel light as a feather, ready to soar skyward. After swallowing those few drops, that sensation became even stronger, as if every pore in his body had been forced open, and spiritual qi was automatically surging in, nourishing his entire physique. It was a feeling too wondrous for mere words to encompass. His divine sense in particular had swelled dramatically, and his blood, flesh, nerves, and bones had all undergone a similar elevation. By contrast, his cultivation level itself had increased the least. The true value of godly medicine is not in raising one's cultivation level, Ling Han thought. He spread out his divine sense and carefully observed the transformations taking place within his body. Vitality. That was the conclusion he arrived at. Under the nurturing effects of the godly medicine, his body and the vitality within it had received a tremendous enhancement. Any martial artist knew that a human being's lifespan was only about 100 years. Only by breaking through to flower blossom tier could one cast off the shackles of mortality and gain another 200 years of life. Otherwise, even if one consumed some 1,000-year ginseng, at best, it would only slow the process of aging and allow one to live a few extra years. Why could a flower blossom tier martial artist gain another 200 years? Because the vitality within his body had been strengthened. After flower blossom tier, each breakthrough into a new tier meant a new transformation. One continued to gain more and more life and vitality, and one's lifespan continuously increased. Most importantly, there was an upper lapse after heaven tier. Since a heaven tier martial artist could reach shattering void tier, then the longest lifespan of a martial artist was limited to 1,000 years. A godly medicine could accomplish the very same kind of effect. He had only swallowed a few drops of that godly fluid, and yet Ling Han's life and vitality had been greatly uplifted. As someone who had once been a mighty heaven tier warrior, he could make a rough estimate. He had gained about 20 extra years of life. 20 years! From only a few drops. If he had managed to swallow the entire stock of godly medicine, how many extra years of life would he have obtained? 1,000 years. That was the lowest estimate. That was equivalent to a heaven tier powerhouse gaining another whole lifetime. And for mortals, that would be another 10 lifetimes. What was the most precious thing in this world? It was not cultivation techniques, martial arts techniques, nor wealth. It was life. An extra 1,000 years of life. This was enough to drive heaven tier martial artists mad. Ling Han stored the 3 roots of the godly medicine into his spatial ring. Extending lifespan was one of the effects of godly medicine, and naturally its greatest effect, yet it also had other uses. To reshape the physical body, and to thoroughly purge the impurities that had accumulated within it, he possessed a heaven-grade spirit base. But that did not mean his physical body was also heaven-grade. On the contrary, his body had been very ordinary. However, after he began cultivating the invincible heaven scroll, his physique had risen to the level of body of dead tree, allowing him to contend with those races that possess special constitutions. In other words, his body was still far from perfection. At the very least, there were still 3 levels ahead: body of rock cliff, body of iron sheet, and body of diamond. Moreover, this was only the first level of the invincible heaven scroll. Godly medicine can help improve the physical body. Who knows? Perhaps I can use it to reach body of rock cliff. Ling Han's eyes brightened. If he managed to cultivate Body of Rock Cliff, not only would his defenses become even stronger than before, he would also be able to condense 2 more drops of indestructible true fluid. He would then have 3 drops in total, and thus even more trump cards in hand. What a pity! If I had obtained an intact stock of godly medicine, perhaps I could soar straight to Body of Iron Sheet, or even possibly Body of Diamond. He could not help but feel deep regret, yet he soon laughed at himself. Then he said inwardly, "A man cannot be too greedy. In my last life, I never even saw a level 9 treasure, and now at the mere 6th layer of Element Gathering tier, not only have I seen a level 10 godly medicine, I've even obtained 3 of its roots. If I am still dissatisfied, then I truly deserve to be struck by lightning." He cast his gaze toward the corpse seated at the center. He had a feeling that this was the source of everything. This corpse had clearly endured a great battle. At least more than 100 of its bones had been shattered. It was difficult to imagine how this person could have continued fighting with so many broken bones. Ling Han slowly approached and examined it more closely, and could not help but be astonished. There were actually multiple golden characters upon those bones. However, perhaps too much time had passed, or perhaps this person had been too gravely injured, for these characters had nearly all dimmed away. Even so, this did not prevent Ling Han from sensing the might within those golden characters. Rather than calling them written words, it would be more fitting to call them part of a design that portrayed the forces of nature, and used these characters as the method by which those forces were displayed. Wait, Ling Han jolted. The Invincible Heaven Scroll is the same, because there is no way to recite it using mere words. In an instant, he reached a sudden understanding. No wonder he had needed 10,000 years to comprehend only the first level of that cultivation technique. It had already surpassed the realm of words and stepped into an entirely new level. However, even with only one glance, I can confirm that these golden characters on the bones are no match for the Invincible Heaven Scroll. The complexity of the two was on completely different planes. But I can definitely conclude that this is the corpse of a shattering void tier powerhouse. If I can pry out even a single shred of his martial intent, it will absolutely be of tremendous benefit to me when I break through to shattering void tier in the future. Ling Han murmured to himself. He widened his eyes, intending to engrave those golden characters into memory. Hong, a red flame suddenly burst forth from the skeleton. It was dazzlingly bright, and a scorching wave of heat surged out, forcing Ling Han to retreat a few steps. A crimson-colored flame floated above the skeleton, taking on all manner of shapes, as if it possessed life of its own. A strange fire! Ling Han gasped in shock. Strange fire was a wondrous substance born from nature. It could also be described as a form of energy, and it was indescribably precious to martial artists and alchemists alike. Once a martial artist refined a strange fire, he could temper his own physical body, raise his cultivation level, or even develop certain fire-type martial arts techniques. And if an alchemist fused with a strange fire, he would gain a tremendous advantage when concocting pills. Why? Because the most critical aspect of pill concoction was fire control. Yet a martial artist's power was limited, and thus the heat of the flames he could produce was likewise limited. The strange fire could multiply this limit by a considerable margin, granting an alchemist vastly greater room to display his abilities. For instance, for Ling Han, with his capabilities, he could concoct pills as high as heaven grade. However, due to the limitations of his cultivation level, he could not do so, because he was unable to produce flames of sufficient heat to temper his alchemy furnace. But if he fused with a strange fire, then while concocting heaven-grade pills would still be impossible. There was a great possibility he could concoct earth-grade pills. Even if he could not do so right now, by the time he broke through to Gushing Spring tier, he should be able to. In an instant, his eyes gleamed brightly.